Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for this E1 Success exam-specific tips and techniques webinar. We're delighted to be joined by Bridget Thomas, a tutor from Astranti. Before I hand over to Bridget, there are a few points I would like to make. To minimise disruption, you've all automatically been muted. If you'd like to ask anything, please enter your question in the question box, as we'll be doing a short Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. Following this session, you'll be sent a copy of the presentation slides and a recording. So without further ado, I'll now hand over to Bridget.
Great, thanks very much for your introduction. So I'm Bridget, I'm the E1 tutor for Astranti training. And before we get underway, I'd like to quickly run you through what we're going to cover in today's session. So for the first part of this session, I'm going to take you through 4 objective test style questions, which are going to be similar style questions to those you might come up against in your E1 exam. And we're also going to cover some of the key topics in the E1 syllabus. And as part of this, I'm going to give you some key tips for how to approach questions in the exam. And then afterwards, we'll go through some other general tips for studying and passing your E1 exam. And as mentioned, there's going to be a question and answer session at the end of the session, where I'll answer any general questions about the E1 syllabus and how to approach studying and passing the E1 exam. If you have any specific technical questions relating to the E1 content, I recommend you send those across to your tutor, or you can email us at Astranti. Okay, so now I'm going to switch across to the first objective test style question for today. So if I just switch over here. Okay, great. So at the top, I provided you with a syllabus reference, and you're not going to be provided with this in your exam like we've got this here. But this is just to show you how this question relates to the CIMA syllabus, as well as give you some of an idea of the breadth of topics that could be tested in your E1 exam. As you'll see as we move through the later questions, the CIMA syllabus is very diverse for E1, and there's lots of different topics that could be tested. Okay, so the first question that I'd like to run you through is on digital technology. The impact of data and technology on finance is a really important theme in the E1 syllabus. And one element of the E1 syllabus requires you to understand how these 10 different digital technologies are used by the finance function and how they can impact on the organisation as a whole. So it's really important when studying for the E1 exam that you learn all the ins and outs of these different technologies and the potential uses in finance and by the wider organisation. Okay, so in this question, we're just going to look at 4 of these different technologies. If I just scroll down, get them all on screen for you. And we're going to be looking at their specific use in the finance function. And in this question, we have a matching question, which is one of the formats of questions that could come up in your exam. Although multiple choice and multiple response questions are the most common formats, I felt it was important to take you through a matching question today, as it's best tackled with a particular approach, and it also allows us to cover a few more of these key technologies. Now, with any exam question, matching or otherwise, your first step should always be to identify the requirement line, which is this line here. This is the part of the question which tells you what you need to answer, and it's usually the last thing that you're given before the options. Here, the requirement line is pretty clear and simple, as we don't have a scenario or any other information given to us before we're presented with options. So this question is asking us to match the following technologies with their use in the finance function. Now, a good next step in a matching question is to look at all the different options that we've got. So these ones down the side here on the left. And in this case, we've got these digital technologies, so we need to identify what they are and have a think about how they could be used in the finance function before we look at the options, because then when we get to the options, we have a good idea of what we're looking for. Now, our first digital technology that we've got here is cloud computing. Now, cloud computing is a method of storing and accessing files remotely over the internet. So if I just write that here, so we've got store, apologies for my messy writing, store and access files. remotely. So for example, if you've ever used Google Drive, this is an example of cloud computing, as you access files over the internet, and these files are not stored on your personal device, your laptop or your smartphone or whatever you're accessing it through. The files are stored remotely on what's called a cloud, and they can be accessed by any users with authorized access from any internet connected device. And these users just access the files as though it was stored on their own device. And often cloud computing platforms include software that allows for team working. So I just add that here, so team working. So multiple members of staff can access a file and work on it collaboratively at the same time as each other, due to the fact that the file is being stored remotely and is being accessed through the internet. Okay, so that's cloud computing. Now let's take a look at the next one, business process automation. So business process automation is simply the transferring of tasks previously done by humans to computers. And this could be entire business processes or just elements of a process. So we've got tasks being transferred from humans to computers. Okay, so that's business process automation. Our next technology is blockchain. Now, blockchain is a way of storing transactional information in a secure and transparent way. So, transactional info in a secure and transparent way. So the blockchain itself is made up of blocks which contain lots and lots of digital information, and each block is linked together using cryptography. And because of how the blocks are linked, it's very difficult for information within the block to be altered once it's added to the blockchain without the whole chain being invalidated. And that's what makes it this really secure way of undertaking transactions. And I also said it's a transparent way of storing transactional data, and that's because it uses a public ledger system where everyone in the system can view the information stored in the blocks. Okay, so that's blockchain, and our final technology that we've got is Internet of Things. Now, Internet of Things describes the interaction of internet-connected devices which gather data about the device and its environment as well as its user. So we've got internet-connected devices, which are gathering data. So each Internet of Things device can send and receive data to each other, for example, smartphones through an online connection. Okay, so now that we've got our 4 different digital technologies, it's now time to look through the options. So let's have a look at our first one here, which is transactions and ownerships of assets can be more easily traced, increasing transparency. So for this option, there could be potentially a couple of correct answers, and one of those is blockchain. By using blockchain, a long-lasting record of transactions can be created, as the blocks in the blockchain cannot be easily edited, which is why it was so secure, meaning that transactions can be easily traced, and as the ledger is accessible to everyone in that blockchain system, it increases the transparency. So one of our options here could be blockchain, so we'll put C there. And the other could be potentially business process automation, because by automating a transaction, a digital log of that transaction is automatically created, which means it could be easier to trace the transaction and perhaps assets being bought and sold, which would be more transparent than, say, a paper trail. So that's our other potential option here. We'll just leave that one for now and come back once we've matched up some of the other answers. So option 2 is financial personnel can work on the same documents at the same time from a different location. Now, this option here can only really be cloud computing. And that's because none of these other options here allow people to work on the same documents at the same time from different locations, whereas cloud computing does. Because the files are stored remotely on the cloud server, that means that people in different locations can work on it at the same time. So we can say that this one can be cloud computing, and we can be pretty confident about that one. So moving on to the third option, which is allows the finance function to cope more easily with varying levels of demand. Okay, well, this one could also initially look like cloud computing, as one thing that I didn't say earlier was that cloud computing is also really easily scalable. So just add that in here that we have it as scalable. And that's because the files are stored on a remote server rather than on local hardware, so computers that you've got physically with you. It's possible to quickly increase the amount of storage required. You don't have to buy lots of new hardware, it's all stored online on remote servers. And so if this option is referring to demand in terms of digital storage space, then this option could be cloud computing. But we've already matched cloud computing to something that we're fairly confident about. So let's have a little bit of a think of what else it could be. And actually this option can also be related to business process automation. And that's because computers are typically much faster at carrying out repetitive process-driven tasks and can carry out multiple tasks at once. And without automation, during business periods, finance staff might be overwhelmed with tasks, for example, processing sales invoices around Christmas, and temporary staff might have to be hired. But by automating processes such as processing invoices, the finance function can more easily cope with fluctuating demand. So this option here must be business process automation, which means we can also now say that the first option here was indeed blockchain, because you can't match one option to two different answers. So say this one's blockchain, which means that our final answer must be Internet of Things. But with any question, it's always important to check that the match makes sense before you move on, as if it doesn't seem right, then it'll indicate that we've gone wrong somewhere here and we need to go back and fix it. So let's have a think about why Internet of Things provides real-time information about processes occurring within the business, products, and customers. Well, that's because for an organization, Internet of Things devices can be used to collect a wealth of data on their internal processes, their products, their customers, to provide a closer view on each of these things. Using sensors, machines could be linked up to the internet to provide real-time information about production. Products themselves could be Internet of Things devices, for example, smart fridges, and that's going to provide both the company and the customer with data about the product's performance and the customer themselves. Okay, so we've got our 4 different answers, which we can be happy with. I'm going to move on now to our next question that I've prepared for today. Okay, so for question 2, we've got a multiple choice question, and we're going to be looking at the finance function's role in the management of components of big data, including variety, volume, veracity, and velocity. And you can see with this question, we've got a bit of a scenario here, but you shouldn't fall into the trap of reading this first. The best approach is always to read the requirement line first, so that when you do read the scenario, you know what information is important and what you're looking for, and that way you're not going to have to read through the question twice. So we're going to skip down to here, which is our requirement line. Which of the following components of big data has a finance function of company A considered addressing in the proposed investments? Okay, and the key term that we've got here is big data. And this is something that is mentioned multiple times on the CIMA syllabus. There will almost definitely be a question on big data in your exam. And by big data, we mean data sets that are so large they cannot be handled through traditional data processing systems. They require specialist systems in order to be collected, processed, stored, and analysed. So I'm just going to put a note here that these are very large. Okay, and so to answer this question, we're also going to need to know what the components of big data are. And if you look down at the options that we've got down here, you can actually see that we're provided with the 4 different components of big data: velocity, veracity, volume, and variety. And so these 4 components are referred to as the 4 V's of big data, or Gartner's 4 V's. So let's go through each of them in turn. So if I just put 4 V's, the first one we'll look at is volume. Okay, so volume refers to the amount of data which is collected by the organization. And so as big data sets are so large, they require these specialist systems in order to handle them. And so if an organization wants to collect and use big data, it has to consider whether it has the systems that are capable of handling these big data sets. And so they have to consider this volume component of big data. So let's just add that in here. We've got very large data sets. Okay, and the next V we're going to look at is velocity. And velocity refers to the speed at which big data is collected. And the rate of data collection for big data is increasing now to the point where big data can be collected in real time. And this means having the right systems in place so that the organization can get real-time information and insights about processes that are happening right now to allow them to react to the latest changes and trends. So we've got data being collected in real time. Okay, so that's velocity. Our next V is variety. Now, variety refers to the range and types and sources of data available to the organization. Typically, big data sets contain a huge variety of different data, and this can make analysis of big data really difficult. And so in order to do so, organizations need to ensure that there are systems in place to organize big data into standardized formats and ensure there's some kind of value attached to the data that's going to allow it to be analyzed. So we've got lots of types and sources of data. Okay, and our final V is veracity. Now, veracity refers to the quality and the reliability of big data. So quality and reliability. And as I mentioned before, big data sets typically include data from different sources which are pulled together to form the big data set. And this means that it's easy for the quality or the source of the data to be disregarded. But as really important business decisions may be based on the insights from big data analysis, it's really important that the data can be trusted and that the users of the data are fully aware of any limitations. Okay, so that's our 4 V's of big data. Now let's take a look at the scenario and see if we can pick out any information from it and see which of the 4 V's can be applied to it. So we've got the finance function of company A considering whether the company should invest in the following. And our first scenario is real-time ETL and data analytics software that will allow the company to process and analyze data as soon as it is collected. Now, you may have come across the term ETL or ETL systems already in your studies, as they're another topic on the E1 syllabus. Basically, ETL systems are used for transferring data. So just leave a note of that here. So used for transferring data. And this is from its source to a destination database. So the data is extracted from lots of different sources, its quality is assessed, the data is transformed so it's in a standardized format ready to use for analysis, and it's loaded into a data warehouse for storage. And we've also got data analytics software, which is simply software for analyzing big data. Okay, so here we're also talking about real-time software. So we've got real-time ETL and data analytics software. So this software will allow company A to process and analyze data as soon as it's available. And if this is, and this is, of course, as I mentioned earlier, going to help manage the velocity of big data, as big data can be collected in real time, and by having this real-time software, insights can be generated in real time too. So company A can react quickly to what the big data is saying. So this is addressing the velocity component of big data. Okay, our second scenario is new data profiling software. As it's been recently discovered that some of the company's processed data is not usable due to inaccuracies, and data profiling would allow this issue to be identified and addressed prior to data processing. So data profiling, this term here, this is carried out as part of the data transfer process, part of that ETL system that we talked about just before. And it examines the characteristics of data for things like quality and accuracy, and any issues that are identified during the data profiling process can then be amended either prior to data processing, as it's the case in the software here, excuse me, or it could be amended during the processing itself. And so because the software would be addressing the quality and the accuracy of the data, then this is considering the veracity component of the data, which was all about the quality and reliability. So we've got veracity for this one. Okay, and our final scenario is a data transformation system to convert data into a standardized format for data analysis. And hopefully this key term here, standardized format, should jump out at you and give you some clues. And that is, of course, related to the variety of big data. The fact that big data sets, are made up of a range of data types, and so the format needs to be standardized in order to allow it to be analyzed. And that is exactly what a data transformation system does. It converts it into a standardized format. So this is variety. Okay, which means we've got 3 V's here. And if we take a look at our answers, option D has both variety, velocity, and veracity, so that is going to be our correct answer. Okay, moving on now to question 3. Scroll down. Okay, and our next question is a multiple response question. And as I mentioned right at the start, multiple choice and multiple response questions are the most common formats in the exam. And multiple response questions are arguably one of the trickiest formats in the exam, as if you choose just one incorrect option, even if you've got the others right, you'll get the whole question wrong. There's no partial points in the E1 exam for getting some options correct. So again, I'm going to take you through a good approach to answering these questions in the exam. And another important theme in the E1 syllabus is how the finance function interacts with other areas of the organisation. And that includes human resources, operations, sales and marketing, and the IT function, which is what we're looking at in this question. And one of the aspects of this interaction is through key performance indicators, or KPIs. Now, depending on the size of the organisation and its procedures, the finance function may be involved in helping to generate KPIs for these areas, collect data relating to the KPIs, analyse this data, and communicate the insights back to the specific area and/or senior management. So for your exam, it's important you know what KPIs are and how they're used. And again, there's something that comes up a few times on the E1 syllabus, so definitely something worth studying. Now, in this question, we do have a mini scenario here, which is going to give us some information, but let's take a look at our requirement line first, because remember, this is always good practice. And we're being asked in this question, which of the following statements describe key performance indicators the finance function could use to evaluate the performance of the IT function? Okay, and we're looking specifically at the IT function in this question, and we're being asked to select 2 options that apply from these 5 different options down here. Okay, so first of all, we need to establish what KPIs are, key performance indicators, this key term here. Now, in a nutshell, KPIs are measures of performance, with the key term here being measurable. So we've got KPIs here, and they are measurable. So in other words, you could collect data on them. That's what makes them measurable. And KPIs are based on critical success factors. So we've got critical success factors here at the top, or CSFs for short. And critical success factors are critical areas that the organisation has to do well in if it's to be competitive and profitable. So these are key areas for success. And so KPIs provide a way to measure these critical areas for success. And it's this distinction between CSFs and KPIs that's really important for this question and any similar questions you might get like this in your exam. Okay, so now that we've kind of looked through the requirement line, let's take a look at our little scenario here to see what information it's giving us, because that's going to have some bearing on which of the answers are correct. So Company A has recently updated its company-wide intranet. Now, this term intranet is something that's useful to know, but not essential for your exam. If you come across a term that you don't know in the exam, don't panic, just carry on, answer the question, and see if you can gauge what the question is asking without having to know every single term. So In this case, an intranet is a private internal network that can be accessed by staff within the organisation, perhaps to store or share files and documents. So we've got this private internal network. Okay, and in this question, senior management wishes to understand how its IT function is now performing since it's updated the intranet. So let's take a look at the options that we've got there. And remember, we're looking for KPIs to measure the IT function's performance. So for option A, we've got the total internet system downtime. The first thing to think about is this measurable? Because remember, KPIs, they are measurable. Well, in this case, you could measure the minutes or the hours that the internet system is down in a certain period of time. So it is indeed measurable. And is it based on a critical success factor? Well, in this case, again, yes. If the internet spends lots of time down, then that's going to hinder the organisation's operations. So it's an area that the IT function has to do well in. So this is looking like one of our correct answers. It's a KPI for the IT function. Okay, so let's have a look at option 2, because remember, we need to select 2 that apply. And remember, in your exam, if you're asked for multiple responses, make sure you select the right number, because if you only select 1 and move on, you will not be getting the question right. So let's look at our option B, staff satisfaction score with the new internet. Okay, well, again, is it measurable? Yes, you could assess this perhaps with a staff survey, getting them to score out of 5 or perhaps 10. So it's something that's measurable. And again, it's something that the IT function has to do well. If the staff find the new system difficult to use, then that's going to hinder their work, which will have a feed-on effect on the organisation's operations. So again, this is looking like a KPI that is relevant to the IT function's performance. So let's select this one. Okay. So we've got 2 correct answers, but just like our earlier question, it's always important to check that our other options are incorrect before moving on, just in case you've made a mistake or you've missed a better answer. So let's have a look at option C then, keeping the internet system live and available at all times. Well, is this something that's measurable? In this case, no, it's not directly measurable, as you have to set another measure, such as the total system downtime, in order to measure whether the internet system is alive and available at all times. This is actually something that's more like a critical success factor, because it's something that the IT function would have to do well, keeping the internet system live and available at all times. So this is a CSF, and for this reason, this option is incorrect. Option D, quick identification and rectification of issues with the new internet system. Well, again, this is something that the IT function has to do well, quickly identifying and fixing issues. In other words, it's a critical success factor, but you'd have to set another measure in order to measure it. For example, the average time taken to identify issues or the average time to fix issues. So it's not a KPI, it's a critical success factor. So again, this is the reason why this option is incorrect. And our final option, option E, sales team, response time. Okay, well, in this case, it is something that's measurable. We've got time here. This would be minutes or hours or perhaps days. So it is something you can measure. But the big question here is whether it's related to something that the IT function has to do well. Well, this is related to the sales team. It's not something that's within the IT function's control. And so it's not really a KPI that you'd use to measure the IT function's performance. So for that reason, this one is incorrect. This one is KPI, but it's not relevant. So that's why reading the question is really important to make sure you know what you're actually looking for, in this case, the IT function. So that's our 3rd question. Moving on to our final question for today. So on our final question, we've got a question related to marketing, and the E1 syllabus contains contents relating to sales and marketing and other areas like human resources, operations, and the IT function. And this is because as a management accountant in a finance department, you need to have knowledge on the fundamentals of these areas in order to provide appropriate advice and insights to these departments, as well as having a general understanding of the workings of the organisation and the wider business environment. But a key mistake that E1 students often make is that because this content isn't accounting based, they assume it's not that important for the exam. But this is a mistake. These fundamental concepts relating to sales and marketing and these different areas like human resources, they're all part of the CIMA syllabus and they will be tested in the exam. So you need to make sure you don't neglect these areas in your study. And to demonstrate that, we can see that we've got the CIMA syllabus reference here at the top, which requires you to understand the marketing mix and the marketing environment, including a PESTEL analysis or the PESTEL factors. And in this question that we're going to look at, we're just going to be focusing on the second part, looking at these PESTEL factors. But you can see that we're looking specifically at a marketing concept. There's no mention of the finance function in here. And for this question, you can see we've got a different format this time, and this is a drop-down option question. So in your exam, when you get this type of question, what will appear is that you'll have these blanks and you'll be able to click onto here and you'll get a list of options that you can then choose from. And with this type of question, you can use the words more than once. And it may be that some of the answers are the same that you pick when you go through all of them. And if we have a look at the requirement line here, we can see that we're being asked to insert the appropriate PESTEL factors from the selection below to fill in the gaps and complete the following sentences. We've got our options down here. So these are actually our PESTEL factors, but what is a PESTEL analysis? Well, a PESTEL analysis is a way to analyze the company's external business environment. So I'll put some notes down here. So we've got PESTEL analysis, which is going to be used to analyze the external environment. And in marketing, this is particularly useful for understanding the marketing environment. So a PESTEL analysis can be carried out as part of market research to understand the market size, the trends, the changes, so that the company can then plan for the future on how it's going to meet its customer needs and how it's going to market to these customers. So PESTEL is simply a mnemonic that stands for political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal. And these are the 6 key areas in which to consider how current and future changes are going to affect the business and therefore the marketing strategy. So let's take a look at which each of these are in turn. So we'll start with political, as that's what PESTEL starts with. So we've got political. Now, political factors are to do with how and to what degree a government intervenes in the economy. So it's all about government intervention in the economy. So it includes things like tax policy, labour law, environmental law, trade restrictions, tariffs, political stability, all things like that. So I'll put an example here as tax policy. And this is going to affect the marketing environment because if we take, for example, a product such as alcohol, which is taxed heavily in some countries, then this will affect the affordability of that product to some customers, which may mean that the company has to market their product to a wealthier customer group or change its pricing. So that's the political factor. Let's take a look at economic next. Now, economic includes things like economic growth, interest rates, exchange rates, and the inflation rate. So if just add in here maybe interest rates as an example. And these are all things that are going to have a major impact on how businesses operate and make decisions, including their marketing decisions. And this is because the state of the economy affects how much money customers are willing to spend on products, which of course is going to affect pricing decisions and who the company markets to. So that's economic. Next we have social. So social includes cultural and demographics aspects in a population. So cultural and demographic. So it's things like population growth rate, age distribution, career attitudes, things like that. And these are social trends which are going to affect the demand for a company's product. So that's social, and next we'll look at technological as our T. So this includes key changes in technology. If you think about our day and age, it's things like internet, social media, automation, as well as the rate of technological change. So key changes to tech. And developments in key technologies are going to affect the demand for certain types of products. And so organizations need to stay on top of these changes to the key technologies in the industry in order to make the most of them in their products and their marketing strategy. So that's technological. Let's look at our second E, environmental. Environmental factors include the weather and the climate. And this especially affects some industries such as tourism, farming, and insurance. And in particular, the impacts of climate change at the moment is both creating new markets and destroying existing ones. And in general, there's this greater demand for products which are more environmentally friendly because of this, and this can be incorporated into the marketing strategy in order to meet this need. Okay, and our final factor is legal. So legal, as the name suggests, is all to do with the law. Things like discrimination law, consumer law, employment law, health and safety law. And this obviously affects how a company operates, as to avoid being fined or a damaged reputation, the company needs to be aware of any law changes to ensure that they're acting within the laws in their country of operation, including its products meeting legal requirements, as well as its marketing. Okay, so that's our 6 different PESTEL factors. Let's take a look at the question that we've got, and we've got a few different scenarios that we're going to have to answer. So our first one is a company which is considering marketing its products in an overseas country which has a higher goods and services tax would have to consider this. What type of factor will affect its marketing strategy? Okay, so the key here is that we're talking about a type of tax, this higher goods and services tax. And of course, this goods and services tax in a country is going to be set by the government as part of the tax policy. And that means that this higher goods and services tax is a political factor that is going to affect this company marketing its products. So this political factor. So our first answer. Our next scenario is a soft drink manufacturer that has recently started producing low sugar varieties of its products after a highly publicized study linking child obesity to sugar sweetened beverages is most likely responding to what type of factor? Okay, so we've got a highly publicized study here, and this is going to change the public perception towards these sugar sweetened beverages. If it's shown to be bad for children's health, the parents are going to stop their children from drinking these products. And so this is an example of a company responding to a social factor, this attitude towards health that is changing. So we've got a social factor. Our third scenario is a gambling company which operates in a country whose government regulates the advertising of gambling would have to consider this what type of factor in its marketing strategy. Okay, so here we're talking about regulation. So we're talking about what's legal and what's not in a country. So even though in this scenario we've got a government involved, this political body, we're actually talking about the regulation that this company is going to have to abide by in its marketing strategy. So this is going to be a legal factor that it has to abide by. So this one is legal. All right, and our final one is a fertilizer company which operates in a country whose government has imposed a carbon tax to promote the reduction of carbon dioxide emissions would have to consider this what type of factor in its marketing strategy. Okay, so although in this question we're talking about climate change, we're talking about the reduction of carbon dioxide emissions, which of course is an environmental kind of issue, what is ultimately affecting the company in this scenario is this carbon tax which is being imposed on it, which is going to be part of the government's tax policy. So again, this is going to be a political factor. And we can see we've got 2 political answers in here, but that's okay. Remember, you can, if you've got this type of question, use your answers more than once. Don't think that because you've got lots of different answers here that you have to use a different one each time. If the question says you can use the words more than once, there's a good chance they might use it more than once. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our objective test questions that I wanted you to run through. what I'd like to do now is just go back to my presentation, and I'll run you through some of the tips that we've covered so far, give you a bit of a summary, and give you a few new ones for approaching your E1 exam. Okay, so to summarise what we've covered so far, it's really important to study everything on the syllabus. Don't neglect any particular areas of the syllabus just because you feel like they're less important, something like marketing or HR. Anything on the syllabus could be tested, and in neglecting areas, you may lose out on valuable marks, which could be the difference between passing or failing. So make sure you're studying everything while you're preparing for your exam. It's really important to read the questions requirement line first. If you've got some kind of scenario or extra information, if you read through what the question is asking you to do first, that means you won't have to read through it again once you've worked out what the scenario is, which will waste valuable time. If you've worked out what the question is asking you to do first, then you'll know what you're looking for when you read through the scenario. Okay, and you should also make sure you're reading the question really carefully. You should be looking out for key terminology, picking out the relevant bits to answer the question. And you should also look out for words such as not and always or best or most, which will influence what the correct answer is. So for example, if you've got a question that's asking you for the best or the most likely answer, that means that some of the incorrect answers could still be technically correct, they're just not the best or the most likely answer. So it's really important to look at every single word in the question and work out what it's actually asking you to do. Okay, so make sure you know all the definitions of the key terminology, as you're unlikely to be given any information about what they mean in the exam. I personally find flashcards of the key terms and the definitions really useful for making sure you have these memorized. So if that suits you, then that might be a good tip for your studying. It's always a good idea to narrow, skipping ahead. It's always a good idea to narrow down your options. Rule out the options that you know are definitely correct and definitely incorrect first, so then you have less options to choose from. It also means if you end up guessing the question, then there's a higher probability that you'll get the question right. If you've managed to narrow down your options to 2 from 4 different options, then suddenly you have this 50% chance of getting the question right instead of 25%. So even if you don't know the question, narrow down your options. It's always a good idea. You should also look out for agreeing and conflicting answers. So if 2 options are saying the same thing, just in different words, and you know one of them is wrong, then the chances are that the other one is wrong too. And likewise, if you've got 2 options that are saying the opposite of each other, then at least one of them has to be wrong. So you can't have 2 opposite things both being right. So look out for those kind of similar options or opposite options in your options in your questions. And even if you think you've got the right question, it's always a good idea to check the incorrect options are wrong before you move on. Because if one of them looks like they're actually correct, it kind of indicates that you've gone wrong somewhere in the answer. So it's always a good sanity check to check those incorrect options and make sure that you can be confident that you got the right ones before moving on. And a few other key tips. Make sure you're practicing lots of questions before you sit your E1 exam, and we recommend that you do these under time conditions, in exam kind of conditions. In the exam, you've got 60 questions to answer in 90 minutes, which is only 1.5 minutes per question. So you should practice answering questions under pressure and make sure you're perfecting your exam technique. So when you get to the exam, you can use your time really efficiently. Because you've only got 1.5 minutes per question, then you should really try to stick to that. Don't spend too much time on one question. If you're taking too long in a question, it's best just to flag it and come back to it. At Astranti, we actually recommend taking this approach where you do the exam in 3 passes. You should go through the exam once, answer all the short questions you're feeling confident about to make sure you're guaranteed those kind of easy marks. Then flag the rest of the questions that you haven't answered and go back through a second time, answer the longer questions that you feel confident about, and then finally go through it a 3rd time and answer all the other questions, the ones you weren't so sure on, guessing if you have to, because you should answer every question in the exam. If you don't lose marks for getting a question wrong. So if you don't know it, just guess. If it's a multiple choice question, you've got 25% chance or 20% chance, depending on how many options are, of getting it right, which is even higher if you can eliminate 1 or 2 of the options. So make sure you answer every question before you finish your exam. So yeah, those are my key tips for the E1 exam. Before we go on to the question and answer session, I'd like to share with you a special offer, which is exclusive to every one of you who's attending this webinar. and that's free access to our E1 study text. And this study text covers everything on the E1 syllabus. And at Astranti, we really pride ourselves on explaining complex subjects really simply in a fun way. So definitely check that out as a free resource to you. To access it, you need to go to the Astranti link that's down at the bottom here. These slides are going to be circulated in a follow-up email later today, so you can grab the link then if you don't want to copy it down. And you'll also, from that page, be able to input this offer code here, which is valid for 7 days. So make sure you check that one out. So now we'll do the question and answer session. We'll open up for questions.
Okay, so first question is in a multi-answer question only. In multi-answer questions, only totally correct answers will be counted, or partially correct answers will be counted as well, question mark.
Yeah, so if you've got a multiple response question, you're asked for two or three options, you have to get the 2 options correct. You won't get any partial marks for just getting 1 option correct. You do have to get all of them correct. Yeah, I hope that answers that one.
Okay, thank you. Where can we get access to mock papers?
Yeah, so it depends what tuition provider you're using. At Astranti, we provide mock exam questions. I don't believe CIMA produce any. I might be wrong with that, but there's lots of different exam or tuition providers that provide mock exam questions. I think at Astranti we've got like 5 different mock exams, each with 60 questions, which are focused on the CIMA syllabus. So there's lots of different, exam questions you can practice as mock exams.
Okay, just wait for some more questions to come through. Those were the only 2 so far, but we'll give it. Okay, there's one more that's come through. What is the pass mark? Is it 67% or 70%?
So it's 100 out of 150, which would be that 67%. With the passing score, it also is a scale score. So you've got 60 questions in the exam, but there's no specific marks per question because each paper or each exam that the students sit is different for each student. So some exams will be a little bit harder than others, but the harder questions will have slightly more marks, they're kind of weighted a little bit more difficulty. So yeah, there'll be a scale score which will be passing 100 out of 150, which is that 67% score.
Okay. Someone's just made a comment saying you can get 2 mocks on the Pearson VUE website for free.
Okay, great. Yeah, I definitely say with before you sit exam, you should go and take a look at Pearson VUE as well. There's a tutorial I think you can do, and you can practice the different kind of components of the exam thing, like using the scratch pad and looking where the timer is, and just the different types of questions that you can answer. So I definitely recommend doing some practice on Pearson VUE beforehand.
Okay. So someone said that they failed 3 times by 1 mark, but they couldn't find anything on the Pearson VUE. Oh, sorry, they're asking if anyone's got the link. So if someone does send me the link, I can just paste it into the chat box, so you've all got that. Okay, give it another minute or so. So someone's asked, I tried the Astranti E1 mock, but I found they were very wordy compared to the Pearson VUE, CIMA aptitude and HIFT mocks. Will the real exam be as wordy as the Astranti?
The short answer is probably no. So at Astranti, we try to design our mocks to be harder than the one that you'll face in the E1 exam, to kind of prepare you for the worst kind of case scenario, and to make sure you're able to answer questions really quickly. So in general, they'll be a little bit shorter than what's in our Astranti mocks, but yeah, we try to over prepare you than under prepare you, I suppose.
And are there certain topics that would more likely come up in the exam?
Well, that's I quite often get asked that. It's quite a tricky question to answer, because basically anything on the syllabus can really be tested. So I don't really want to point anyone in a direction of a particular topic. You can search the CIMA syllabus online and take a look at kind of the diversity of the different topics there, and make sure that you're still studying those ones that don't feel as accounting based, because they will come up as well. So yeah, sorry, it's not a very specific answer, but yeah.
Is the exam in sections that are based on the text?
So in the exam, the questions will be generated randomly. The way that CIMA has set up the syllabus is that there's 5 different parts, and each is weighted 20% of the question. So I guess that would be a bit like 12 questions per area of the syllabus. But it won't be set up in parts. They'll come up just randomly, and you won't know which question is related to which part of the syllabus. Yeah, and I think a lot of the mock exams that you'll come across is done the same, that there'll be kind of random questions coming up rather than being structured in any sort of way.
Okay. Is there a fixed ratio of questions, like 10 choose 2 out of 5, 10 fill in the space, 10 true or false, and so on?
No, there's not a fixed ratio. There's definitely more multiple choice questions and multiple response questions. I think it's estimated about 70% will be made up of those multiple response and multiple choice, and then you'll get a mixture of other questions like matching and drop down options, and there's also kind of drag and drop questions that I didn't cover in today's session. But multiple choice and multiple response are definitely the majority of the questions, and the other questions will be, the questions as a whole are kind of picked randomly out of a question bank to make up the CIMA exam. So it could be that you get slightly more of one type of question than someone else does on their other exam. Yeah, so no set numbers.
Someone's asked, will I need a calculator?
For the E1 exam, there's no bits on the syllabus that ask you to calculate anything, so I don't think you'd need a calculator. No.
Okay. And if we do need a calculator, do we need any specific one?
Oh, sorry, that just cut out at the end.
So did you say on the last question that they would need a calculator or not?
No, you shouldn't need a calculator, no. For other CIMA exams where you do need a calculator, there are CIMA approved calculators, so you'd have to go and check. I think you can check on Person View to make sure you've got the right sort of calculator for the other CIMA exams, but for the E1, you shouldn't need a calculator.
Okay, someone has their E1 exam tomorrow. Do you have any last minute tips?
Oh, well, good luck for your exam tomorrow. No, I guess just relax. Make sure you're not spending too long on different questions. I think time management is a really important thing in your exam. If you come across a question that you're stuck on, just flag it up. There's a flag function in Pearson View, the Pearson View kind of interface, which allows you to put a little red flag on the question and come back to it at the end or whenever you click on the flagged question. So yeah, don't spend too long on one question. If you're struggling, just move on, answer some easy questions just to get those guaranteed marks, and yeah, relax. I'm sure you'll do really, really well.
Okay, are we allowed to bring scrap paper and pen, or will that be provided?
So You should be provided when you get to your exam place with a little whiteboard which you can write on and you can wipe out. And I think during your exam you can put up your hand and ask them to provide you with a new whiteboard if you run out of space, so you will have that kind of working area in front of you. There's also a scratch pad function in Pearson VUE where you can click on somewhere on the exam interface and you'll have a place to write notes, which gets, it's just kind of like a notepad that you can access from all the questions to write yourself notes. So there's kind of those two different ways of keeping notes during the exam. You won't be able to bring any of your own paper or your own pens into the exam. It'll just be what's provided.
Can you review all questions even if you don't flag for a review?
Yeah, I think you can. I think it shows you the ones that you haven't put any answers for. And then there's a function where you can bring it up and you can quickly scroll through all the different questions, even if they're not flagged. Yeah, there is that functionality.
Okay, so that seems like it's all there for questions, no more coming through. So thank you very much, Bridget. Thank you everyone for attending. You'll see that there is a SurveyMonkey link in the chat box. If you could all give us feedback, that'd be fantastic. Within the next few hours, you will all receive a recording of this webinar and also the presentation slides. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.